Good evening and welcome to Tiriam Talk Show. Our guest was born in the Kurdish region of Turkey. He's a poet, novelist and translator who now lives in Istanbul, where he works as a language teacher. Ciwanmerd Kulek has translated a number of literary works from English, Spanish and Turkish into Kurdish by writers such as William Faulkner, James Joyce or Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Ciwanmerd Kulek, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to our show.
Thank you for getting me here. It's my pleasure.
Our pleasure to have you on the show. Let's start by talking about your identity as a Kurdish living in Turkey and the way you first came across this drive to become a writer.
Actually, the matter of identity never left me during my writing career, and what made me choose the language I'm currently writing in. I talk about Kurdish. I know maybe it's not very likely to write in a country whose official language is going to be Kurdish during my lifetime. When I first wanted to be a writer, I didn't have an idea about any written Kurdish, and I didn't see it even necessary to write in Kurdish. When I was a university student in the capital city of Turkey, in Ankara, maybe that was the first time, when I came across with people, with an environment where everything was Turkish, I realized that I am something different. And then I decided to choose between Turkish and Kurdish. That was a step after choosing a career of writing. So it was not an easy choice for me because I didn't even know how to introduce myself in a written text in Kurdish.
So it was basically spoken Kurdish, but
yes,
the written form you were not aware because you were educated in Turkish, right?
Of course, the schooling, everything, mass media is in Turkish, but I grew up in a family environment where the only language was Kurdish, and the city where I was grown up still, mostly everybody was speaking Kurdish. And still, Kurdish was a banned language for decades in nearly all the 4 countries where Kurdish population is divided. The Kurdish literature was more an oral literature. When you don't have the chance to get educated in that language, then you don't have even the written text. So when I decided to write in Kurdish, I started to search for those Kurdish samples and examples so that I can find my way into expressing and writing my stories in that language. And I just could find 4 books written in Kurdish in a bookstore in Ankara. That is nearly the same number of books which were published in Turkey during the period when Kurdish was banned, and the only books published at that time were mostly illegally published, or their authors were jailed or imprisoned, or etc. So when this is the stage when I came across the challenge of writing Kurdish, and I was also inspired by the motivation to produce in Kurdish.
And tell us about your very first piece, work in Kurdish, and what was it like, and when you look back, what's your take on it?
Actually, first piece, okay, I leave the first published text aside.
Yes.
My first piece was when I decided to write in Kurdish. The first thing I turned to look at was my memory, because the Kurdish, up to that time, the Kurdish was just the language of my memory, of my past, of my childhood, of my parents. So the only source was that, and the way to get to this away from home was just to remember, to recollect. So all of the Kurdish words I could remember, I put them down in the similar Turkish letters and alphabets, and I noticed that most of the things, there were many things that I was about to forget. So that is the worst thing that could happen to a language when people start to forget their language. So to stop that process, I just put down that day when I decided to write into Kurdish, I put down all the words which was more likely to be forgotten by me, with a scripture that I was not comfortable or educated. Mm-hmm. And then I started to make my experience written in Kurdish. I kept diaries. My daily life was in Turkish, so to transform it into Kurdish, whatever I observed, I leave it at that day. I wrote in Kurdish in a diary, so that to make Kurdish not the language of my past, but to make it the language of my present day.
Now, if you look back since your years as a college student, and as we speak nowadays, with regards, of course, this is a very complex issue. It entails different layers, and of course, it involves a lot of politics. But if we're talking about the issue of education and identity, have you seen any sort of improvement? Let's say, if you look at the situation where you are originally from, which is a village in the southeastern part of Turkey.
Improvements,
in terms
it depends on the perspective you take on to look at the issues. For example, our most famous Kurdish national poet, Ahmed Khani, nearly 300 years ago, in his very famous and great Mesnevi, called to the Kurds and their leaders and political authorities, etc., to acknowledge their identity, to improve it, and to let people be educated in their own language, to get united, etc. At that time, he was complaining from the issues what I am complaining now, nearly 300 years later. But when I compare, at his time, when literacy was lower, the amount of works produced was maybe lower. Today in Turkey, approximately 250 books are published in 1 year. We don't have that many books from that age. But I think they were, in a sense, luckier than me that at their time, nearly all of the Kurdish people could speak Kurdish. But in my time, with a greater amount of books, and with a greater number of literate people even in Kurdish, still we have less and less people who can speak Kurdish. So
is it also because of, allow me to jump in here, the destruction of Kurdish villages, migration to cities, and the impact of modernization and the modern life, daily life, is it also related to that?
Of course, modernism, mass media, schooling, formal education, all of this didn't exist 100 years ago. And even if the steps now the governments who oppress or don't recognize the Kurdish people's cultural rights, the steps they took today, if they had taken before 50 years ago, it would be very beneficial and useful and helpful to keep the Kurdish language and identity. But today, with the influence of mass media, schooling in only Turkish, and the Turkish being the only language which dominates the market, the trade, and which, if without it you cannot get a good profession, any proper profession, make a livelihood. So all of this really made a bad and very strong impact on Kurdish people. So that's why we can see the families where parents, even who cannot speak Turkish properly, have kids who cannot speak Kurdish.
Is there, on the other hand, a sort of revival and the revival movement with regards to the issue of education and culture? I mean, something that would go on despite the constraints, despite the fact that formal education is in Turkish and mass media is in Turkish. I mean, alternative ways to circumvent this problem.
That's what I believed when I first decided to write in Kurdish, and what I tried to do. There is a stream. It is very violent, very powerful, and I feel that I swim against this powerful tide and stream. If you swim against a stream, a tide, it means that you want to change the course of that stream, which is next to impossible. But you believe in it, you say it might change, or if not, sometimes you feel it as paying tribute to your past, even if you are not going to succeed in the end. I want to believe that every word I put down on a paper in Kurdish language will contribute to the preservation and improvement of the Kurdish language identity. I know it's not going to be a kind of solution to all Kurdish people's great, messy troubles. Their problems will not be settled down with that. But that is the most important thing sometimes when you look back, that you can be proud of, that you can feel satisfied, that you cannot escape at some points. So even if I am sometimes disappointed and frustrated, I think I should keep doing that. I don't know what in the end will happen. Will Kurdish language stand, or will it be annihilated, or will be extinct? And I now have begun to not care about this in comparison to the beginning of my career, when I thought that with my books I will build up a nation, a literature, and something else. Maybe it will be done. I'm not sure about that. And I don't care anymore whether this will help to the cause, but this is my literary and artistical passion and aspiration, and I think I should carry on.
Carrying on against the backdrop of a very complicated and troubled situation in Turkey, and with regards to, let's say, even specifically the Kurdish question. What's your take on the recent years? The peace process derailed, and now are we back to square one? I mean, where are we in terms of the Kurdish question within Turkey, of course, because then we have the Kurdish question in Iraq, in Syria, or even in Iran, of course.
Yeah, the most tragic and disappointing fact with Kurds in their history is that they are divided by 4 countries with different agendas, backgrounds, but towards Kurdish people's rights nearly with same attitudes. Of course, in Iraq it's a bit more different and hopeful in a sense that they get kind of autonomy. In Turkey, there is an armed struggle since the year I was born. And there has been a peace process. And before that, there was a period when the government let Kurdish people to sing in Kurdish, to write in Kurdish, to publish in Kurdish, and they admitted the Kurdish identity in a sense, let's call it that way. The peace process was, to me, the peak of this optimistic, hopeful process, where everybody was more hopeful and had really good dreams about the future. So we thought that some things could change. And at the peak of this process, it broke down in a very harsh, violent, and frustrating way when the Kurdish armed group came to the cities and the state sent the army, and there were clashes in the city centers, which made no use to Kurdish people, contributed to nothing, and ended up with devastation. So this is the first time in my lifetime that I see Kurdish people, Kurdish cause, their struggle for their rights, everything went back and worse. So today, this day, I am more pessimistic than 3 years ago when the peace process began. And all the Kurds suffered more than 2 years ago. So, and nobody is held responsible, accountable, and it is kind of a mess, and in this mess, we try to survive, to keep going on. And I don't know if there will be a peace process or not, what the politics and the politicians will do or decide about us. But I am angry and mad at those sides, and I am really fed up with waiting for politicians to decide about my right, my cultural rights, the future of Kurdish language and literature. I think the Kurdish people should be the ones to talk to decide and to determine their future, their rights to education, their linguistic rights. Those are the writers, the intellectuals. I think the politicians and policy is not always the right address to appeal a cause issue.
You were mentioning until 2 years ago, a couple of years ago, but you have in your country, in Turkey, the same leader, previously Prime Minister, now President Erdogan. What happened? I mean, do you see, of course, we can see a change in his stand towards the Kurdish question, because a few years ago, he seemed to be willing to come up with a breakthrough, and his message was clearly different from that of his predecessors, previous more Kemalist leaders of Turkey.
To me, it is not a matter of leaders, but I admit that the President Erdogan in the beginning of 2000 years has taken some risks and have taken some steps which none of his predecessor has done. At least during my lifetime, I didn't see. Mm-hmm. You couldn't even see a normal a leader of a political party on TV talk about Kurdish people. He started the process, he took some risks, but whatever his stance or political rhetoric, I think the issue is in the veins and depths of the political systems, regimes, and states which has longer and more long-standing histories than we think. Mm-hmm. The issues are not something which is really determined by the political rhetoric of that day. As a political leader, Erdogan is, his talk, his tone changed, but all the world changed. The Middle East of today is not the Middle East of 3-4 years ago. So there are some things which are directed to the inside of the home, and there are things which are motivated or urged or encouraged by the outside influences. So I don't know, we Kurds are at what point of all of this political conjecture, whether everything, every bad thing really has something to do with us, with our faith. What is to our benefit or what is to our harm is really very blurred and not clear as before. You cannot claim that this is too good to people and your future, this is bad. Because I have seen the ones without powers, but ones who aspire for power, struggle for power, and claim that they are disadvantages, sometimes can be more cruel and brutal than the ones who have in power. So I don't believe to the struggle in, between those parties. To me, there must be some change, and this change in the long end will be brought about by people and what's going on their mind. We are influenced by many things, and we decide by some things which sometimes has nothing to do with the political rhetoric.
Now, if we look at rhetoric and also the deeds of Erdogan, well, you can see it pretty much everywhere, especially in Western media, the headlines about Erdogan's illiberal and authoritarian drive. How worried are you about this?
Actually, yes, there is a powerful Erdogan. But before he wanted to be a more powerful president, he was also influential and powerful in Turkey. Maybe it sounds strange, but I'm not that worried that much. It's a process of Turkey just transforming itself. Sometimes some things are more evident and to the forefront. But I think I knew worse. And I don't know what will come out of this process. And yes, in Western standards, some things happening in Turkey are really very strange. But to look into the issues, I think West also sometimes takes sides with superficial data. I met even writers living in France, Syrian Kurdish writers, who told me that he cannot even get his books published in French, but French publisher asked him to write a book against Erdogan. So I think Erdogan must be criticized, the government must be criticized. But when you base this criticism on some deficient, insufficient, or lacking data, information, you just end up supporting him, making him more powerful, not weakening him. So all the, I think, unjust and unfair critiques doesn't work. And it didn't work beforehand. That is why we still have the same president and every time with more powers. Because there are very, I think, sometimes stupid and distrustful claims.
And recently, I mean, we've been getting this news and looking at these tensions flaring up between Turkey, the Turkish authorities, and European Union authorities, namely the situation in the Netherlands, also with regards to Germany. How are you following this? And what's your view on the wider picture of Turkey's relations with the European Union?
Actually, let me confess, I don't follow. And this is the first time and first place that I talk about politics somewhere. And that is really something new for me. So I don't follow and daily politics. Really, I try to move away from it as much as possible sometimes to concentrate what I can do best. Because if everyone concentrates on what they can do best, I think everything is going to be better. So I'm not entangled with it. I know and I can guess there are very strange, stupid, weird things happening, but I'm not stuck with this. Behind the scene, the things going around are very different, and we as normal people, if we just stuck up with this daily flood of political rhetoricals, insults, other statements, declarations, etc., we will never have a chance to find our way and never have a chance to put a light on the more critical and essential issues.
Talking about your way is also related, of course, with translation. You've been translating a number of authors from, as I was saying, from English, Turkish, Spanish, into Kurdish. When you're translating, do you feel that you are also somehow partially rewriting to some extent, because the issue of translating also entails some sort of creativity and the finding the right word and to delve into what you believe is the true meaning of some specific expressions, let alone idiomatic expression, but even some more common words. Tell us about that process, because you've been actually, I was talking about James Joyce, William Faulkner, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and others.
Now, I have to make another confession to you. Just remembering all the translations I have done, all the books I have read, etc. I think I'm not so much happy with doing all of this, being engaged so much with writing and translating so many works and being engaged with continuously learning new languages. I think I missed opportunity to read more books. That's one thing sometimes I feel sorry about, but of course, translating, I think I get closer to a writer, to the back of his mind, to delve into his imagination, and to the veins of the texts. Just building it up, rebuilding it up actually, word by word again, in a language which didn't have any contact and interaction before. For Spanish, in that case, we don't have even a dictionary, let alone a dictionary, we don't have even a proper sentence translated from that language. So, in a way, when you are doing this, you are setting an example for the ones to follow. And in each translation, after each translation, I feel acquiring a greater command of providing this communication between languages and cultures. And it's good for me as a writer to travel between the texts, to rethink about them, to get closer to the style of the techniques of those writers utilized, and to benefit from them. I know that writing books, creating a fiction is difficult. Many people claim that, but sometimes translation is more, I think, arduous work. It's more tiring and more difficult. And sometimes in halfway, I want to quit. I say, hey, with just half the amount of the energy and efforts I just put into this work, I can write very good books. Why don't I do that? But I think translating from world literature has two goods for us Kurds, one linguistically and one in terms of literature. By translating, I think I test the ability of Kurdish language, discover new things, and make room for some new words, maybe from those texts or from other languages, and to place them in the Kurdish language, and to revive the powers of Kurdish language, to put them into force and into use. And literally, you can produce many literary works in Kurdish, but if you don't have word literature in your language, and if your authors cannot read those authors, Marquez, Dostoevsky, Kafka, in Kurdish, how can they truly and authentically get into the imaginary, illusory world of these authors and then merge them with their imagination and create better works. So if we want our works to make sense, we need the world literature next to them. That makes sense. Not just in terms of building up bridge, but it's really just empowering each other.
One last question. You're the author of 5 novels in Kurdish so far. Your next step, anything in the pipeline? What are you planning to do next?
Currently, I'm translating a book by an Argentinian writer, and I'm happy to announce it. Because it's a very good book and good stories. Jorge Luis Borges. I'm translating his books, Ficciones. Borges has written some of the best stories, and he widened the imagination, the scopes of writers and fiction greatly. It contributed to the literature after him and before him. So I would like to see him in Kurdish, and I am halfway in my translation. Of course, I have some other books in my mind to translate in the future, but maybe soon I will not have a chance to deal with this. I started to write chronicles for a Kurdish-Turkish journal, which is published in Turkey. And maybe after finishing with my translation and having a bit more room and time, I would like to put my efforts and energy in writing a book which I have been carrying along with me for many years, but I haven't been able to write just a single sentence of that story. I hope I can manage it.
Ciwanmerd Kulek, thank you very much for sharing this with us, your story.
I really appreciate it. It was really a pleasure.
Fascinating talk. Pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
And to you at home, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.